Is Xbox about to make a huge mistake? I might be the only person on the internet right now to say this, but I don't actually think so. And wait, don't get me in the comments. I'm going to talk about it. But first, let me set up the context for what's going on with Xbox, and also welcome you to the darkest depths here where we stay warm through the heat of hot video game discourse. And let me tell you, the fires of the console wars are burning very bright, maybe brighter than they ever have, honestly, for better or for worse, always for worse. Anyways, let's get into it. This story broke on Sunday. It came from Xbox Era. This was written by John Clark. Exclusive. Microsoft plans Starfield launch for PlayStation 5. The article starts off reading, "For many weeks now, rumors have persisted regarding Microsoft's intentions to release a number of first-party games, namely Hi-Fi Rush and Sea of Thieves, on rival platforms, mainly PlayStation 5 and Switch. According to our sources, who have asked to remain anonymous because they are not authorized to talk about company plans, that list of games also includes Bethesda Game Studios' Starfield." The article continues, "According to sources, we understand that currently Microsoft are planning a launch for Starfield on PlayStation 5 post the release of the already announced Shattered Space expansion for Xbox and PC, which is on target to arrive at some point later this year. We've also been informed that Microsoft have made additional investment into PlayStation 5 dev kits to support ongoing development efforts, adding further fuel to the fire. As the already existing rumors have suggested, the idea of bringing first-party titles to competing console platforms marks a massive change in strategy for Microsoft, and from what I understand, it's not been without fierce internal debate on this new direction. According to our sources, Microsoft's senior leadership have reportedly debated the various pros and cons of releasing more of their exclusive software elsewhere and internally. Not everyone is necessarily happy with the decision, but recouping the potential money left on the table by releasing elsewhere has arguably won out. So that was the story from Xbox Era. Then there's this story from The Verge that followed it up, suggesting that Indiana Jones might also be coming to PlayStation 5. This is from Tom Warren over on The Verge, who writes, "Bethesda's upcoming Indiana Jones game is also tentatively set to launch on Sony's PlayStation 5 console. A source familiar with Microsoft's plans tells The Verge that Bethesda is also considering bringing Indiana Jones and the Great Circle to PS5. A new multi-platform approach for certain Xbox games is emerging inside Microsoft, we're told, with the company weighing up which titles will remain exclusive and others that will appear on the Switch or PS5 in the future. While Bethesda will launch its Indiana Jones game first as an Xbox console exclusive, it's currently set to have a rather short period of exclusivity, we're told. A release for PS5 is being considered for some months later, with Bethesda tentatively targeting a December 2024 launch for the Xbox and PC versions. We're told that a Hi-Fi Rush announcement for non-Xbox platforms is expected in the coming weeks." That all happened, and then Monday morning, Jeff Grubb on Game Mess Mornings also said that Gears of War could potentially be considered. This is a transcript by Tom Ivan over at VGC. I should be putting up a video clip of Game Mess Mornings right now. I don't know if I'll get to that. It's really late. The transcript from Grubb talking on Game This Morning says, "The other one that I've heard that's definitely under consideration, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen, but it's in talks, is Gears of War. Gears of War is being considered for this." Grubb also said that Microsoft was at one point planning to publicly explain its new initiative at the end of February, but that given the mounting speculation, there's a chance that an official announcement could be brought forward. And that's basically exactly what happened. There's so many games now swirling around in this rumor pile and speculation and there's a lot of different reporters corroborating these stories, that it's kind of hard to imagine that this isn't a thing that's going to happen. People at first just completely started melting down. People are losing it. The hysterics are just on another level I haven't seen in a long time, or probably ever. Phil Spencer did respond on Twitter, "We're listening and we hear you. We've been planning a business update event for next week where we look forward to sharing more details with you about our vision for the future of Xbox. Stay tuned." And the replies in here are bonkers. I saw like a melted Xbox, but obviously this is like the Twitter flagged it as being a picture from somewhere else that this person said that they melted their Xbox because they're so mad about this decision. How could they possibly think of bringing their exclusives, which make Xbox a valuable platform, over to their direct competitor? And yeah, that's the gist of it. Now let's look at some of these to kind of just get the gist of where people are at. One of the shorthands people are using are saying like Xbox is going to go full third party. There's a huge assumption that if this happens, that Xbox is completely doomed. Xbox hardware is like no longer valuable. And I think everybody just needs to slow down. Like there's a lot of really big assumptions being made. We don't have all the details about what this is. It doesn't even seem like Xbox has all the details here. So let's go through it. Can someone Photoshop this, making Satya Nadella touch Phil's head, basically saying like this is a directive coming down from the top where there's money being left on the table, and maybe the Xbox division is fighting back against this idea. Big responses about people saying like basically Xbox is doomed. Millions of players would abandon the Xbox ecosystem and move to PlayStation because they could play games from both companies. And I don't know, the thought of that is, wow, like I'm sure a lot of people would leave, right, and change, but I think that there's like enough loyal Xbox fans that somebody is always going to be in camp Xbox, on Team Xbox. So to think that the whole thing would come just crumbling apart from a few exclusives making their way over to PlayStation seems kind of wild. Making Xbox/Microsoft full third party will in the long term be worse for overall for gaming. And keep in mind, I'm basically a PlayStation fanboy saying this. Competition is good. When you all compete, we win. That's from Pio. Next week, Phil, these dudes couldn't last a weekend before canceling their subs and selling their consoles. That's just evil. Thank you for responding, but you guys should be doing this update like yesterday, allowing more rumors to potentially come out before the announcement isn't good for the Xbox brand. There was an additional kind of think piece that was written by Paul Tassi, who kind of summarized what potentially could happen with the Xbox and the brand and why people are upset. Let's look at this. This is on Forbes. If Microsoft gives Starfield to PlayStation, what does Xbox become? I think this gives should actually be in quotes here, because there's a changing of hands of money here, right? Like Microsoft isn't giving PlayStation Starfield. They're going to sell Starfield on PlayStation consoles, in which Sony will get a small chunk of those sales, but Microsoft will make millions. They would reach millions of players, right? Potentially they could double the sales of Starfield or more, since PlayStation has a larger install base. Yeah, anyways, I mean, Paul Tassi, smart dude, and a great reporter. So I'm not trying to beef. I'm just saying, I don't know. It's a good headline, I guess. Anyways, Paul wrote, this seems to have leaked out because there is some sort of internal strife within Xbox about this plan, and there are cases for and against. The main idea is that Xbox has lost the console war for 2 generations now, and they're going to just stop pretending otherwise. They've repeatedly said their future is in services and bringing Xbox games to as many people as possible. On the player side, Xbox owners still get their day one Game Pass launches, and PlayStation players now get the same games eventually. Win-win, you would think, but Tassi goes on to kind of explain and take apart the thought behind this and why it's not necessarily win-win. Perhaps he writes, except that's not how it's being received more widely. The concept raises so many questions it's hard to know where to start. And then he says, for starters, it would make the premise of buying an Xbox for Microsoft's promised big lineup of exclusives relatively pointless, and players who have already bought into that ecosystem based on Microsoft's stated plans about big future games are understandably upset as a result. Let me just address this really quickly, because I feel like, again, this is a huge jump of logic to say, like, that if Microsoft does this, like a lineup of exclusives would be relatively pointless. That's not true with timed exclusivity. There's a reason that PlayStation would only pay for 6 months to a year of timed exclusivity for third-party games, or second-party games, I guess, if you want to get weird about it. Again, things like Square Enix RPGs and other titles. It's because that's a long enough time to get a market advantage, right? And nobody really lost their mind when PlayStation said I'm sure people did lose their mind when PlayStation said they're bringing their top tier exclusives to PC, within a year's time, or a year after the big titles had launched, and then they had a chance to sell on PlayStation, and then they're going to double dip, right? They're going to sell on PC as well. It's a lot of the same logic here, except Xbox and PlayStation are direct competitors. It still just feels like a big jump of logic, even coming from game critics. I know Jeff Grubb and Mike Minotti on the Game This Mornings were talking in a similar fashion, right? And I think they checked themselves a little bit, or they didn't get too carried away with Xbox's Doom stuff. But hypothetically, we're all running this scenario through our mind and trying to figure out, what happens if this strategy does change in this big way for Microsoft. Tassi added, there's also the erasure of any sense of Xbox community, something Microsoft has cultivated for decades now. That's something I also want to address. Microsoft, or Xbox as a gaming company, has made a huge amount of strides for consumers, for gamers in the space, in major ways, like backwards compatibility. They went above and beyond trying to get 360 games to work, get backwards compatibility working on Series X and Series S, and now you can play 360 games, right? And they perform better. There's also, their efforts. They were the first company to make an official elite controller, pro controller, right? To take that a little more seriously. I think those things are way overpriced, but they're thinking about gamers, right, in that way. And while speaking about controllers, I'd say adaptability controller, right? The accessibility controller that they built. They're first to the market with that, and different initiatives like that. And Game Pass, I think, is part of their new larger strategy, which we'll get into. But there is a lot of goodwill that Xbox has built up, and so this move, considering an erasure of the community that Xbox has built, is kind of wild to me, because nothing is going away from them doing this, right? You'll still have all the things that you already had, all the games you already bought. They're not going anywhere just because PlayStation is going to have now what were Xbox exclusives before, like months or a year after these games come out. This feels like an all or nothing situation, Tassie writes. There's some idea that maybe this is applying to big Bethesda games like Starfield and Indiana Jones, but not core games like Halo. And then he says, oh, but wait, maybe the Master Chief Collection and maybe this other game or that game. So this is purely speculation, right? This is like going off the rails a little bit. I think it's respectfully going off the rails, but the point is players are going to have no faith in knowing what will actually be Xbox Game Pass exclusive going forward if Microsoft is just picking and choosing randomly. There's so many unknowns, it's making people feel really, really uneasy. He adds, with this, Xbox essentially becomes a third-party publishing brand that for some reason still makes hardware, but also they want you to subscribe to Game Pass, but you don't need an Xbox for that. And you also don't need it for exclusive games anymore either, maybe just early access or not, who knows. And I think, again, like big assumption, or like this third party kind of language is being used a lot. Like it's in like YouTube videos that are trying to go viral, right? With the kind of clickbait nature of like Xbox is gonna go full third party. And it's like, it's such a weird way to encapsulate that, just because they release a few games exclusives onto PlayStation, it doesn't mean that all the games are coming to PlayStation, right? They can pick and choose which ones they're going to be. And Tassie's criticism here is like, if there's no logic to what they're picking and choosing, then like it could just be anything and consumers will be confused. And I don't think that's the case. I don't think people are going to be that confused. It either will be on PlayStation or it won't, just like games are now, right? Just like how exclusives kind of work now. And you know, it gives an extra boost to that game when it comes to PlayStation, or it won't if it doesn't. So I kind of collected a lot of what I was seeing online into a list of problems people are having with this move, because for one, for me, it feels bizarre to get this worked up and this kind of apocalyptic about Xbox's potential new strategy. It doesn't really change what you have already bought or invested into the Xbox ecosystem, but it, you know, arguably it could affect how you feel about Xbox going forward. So let's get into the list of things I wrote down here. And again, I'm just gonna say, there's so much rumor and speculation here that this is likely going to happen. Phil Spencer didn't deny the rumors or the claims right off the bat. He didn't correct any of the language or any of the stuff that's kind of spiraling out of control. We might see an update like that where they kind of get more specific about what the update's going to be next week. But yeah, didn't deny anything, just kind of said, hey, we have an announcement coming to like talk about our strategy, which if it's coming next week, it makes me feel like things would be more aligned, or there's certain games that they're going to commit to going to PlayStation already. And then maybe some of these other ones like Indiana Jones, maybe they'll wait and see on given this backlash. There's just too many people cooperating for this not to be happening. There's a strategic change coming. We're just going to have to wait till next week to find out exactly what the details are. Until then, I think like mostly people should just chill, but that's just not how this works. Here's my kind of summary and list of why I think people are upset. Overall, they feel like bringing exclusives over to PlayStation 5 will devalue the Xbox platform, right? A platform that they've invested time and money and energy and part of their selves and identity into, which is always a hazardous thing, but I mean, that's the nature of gaming to a certain extent. Just adding to that, they also feel like the company they've supported is betraying them. That's like on another kind of different level, where that's like, how could you align yourself with the enemy? And I'm going to get into this, but Xbox has kind of been saying that they're done with the console wars for a while. Like Phil Spencer had one quote where he's talking about how, you know, he thought it's disgusting, like how tribal things can get. He used tribalism, I think, directly as a quote. Xbox fans have been waiting for award-winning exclusives, given all the Xbox studios that have been purchased up. Now check this out. There's like 20-something Xbox exclusives in the works, right? And we've just talked about 4 or 5 that could be coming to PlayStation. No mention about Fable or Perfect Dark or some of these other bigger titles. And we know that Bethesda did have issues too in the past. There was some in the FTC filings or in the court case over the Activision Blizzard acquisition between Xbox and the FTC. Some correspondence there was made public that Pete Hines was upset with the platform exclusivity that Starfield would be facing. And yeah, maybe Starfield didn't do as well as anybody expected, and it maybe didn't move as many consoles as they expected. And so now part of this situation is about trying to recoup some of those costs for the development of Starfield by putting it on a different platform. So yeah, we're just talking about 4 or 5 exclusives at this point, and maybe it's more, but it's not all, right? There's this just a huge assumption that Xbox is going to put all of their exclusive games on the PlayStation, and they're just talking about doing a few in the same way that PlayStation, you know, has been doing a few on PC. They have now kind of a pipeline where their major games are going to PC, and that's a little bit different. But you know, if this doesn't work out for Xbox, they can always stop, right? They can always stop publishing those games on their direct competitor's platform. But yeah, here's a list of all the upcoming Xbox exclusives. This is on True Achievements. This was put together by Heidi Nicholas. Thank you, Heidi, for just a comprehensive list here. We've got, you know, Senua's Saga, Hellblade, Stalker 2, Avowed, 33 Immortals, which has been shown off, Dungeons of Hinterberg, Let's Dope, Perfect Dark, Project Mara, that's the horror game from Ninja Theory, Everwild, Fable, Outer Worlds 2, you know, Contraband, we don't know much about that. But yeah, just there's still a lot of big games on here. Elder Scrolls 6, which is years and years away. Citizen Sleeper 2, that's going to be sick. And OD, that's the Kojima project. So there's a lot more, you know, exclusive games in the chamber here. Not to mention sequels to any of these that could potentially be exclusives in the future. So yeah, people are kind of losing it, and I understand why, but I think to really understand how Xbox get to this spot, you really kind of have to listen to what they've been saying for years and kind of, you know, suppress the console warrior in your brain down a little bit. Because I think it's thrown a lot of people for a loop, including, I think, people in the media who have just been kind of losing it, as well as like the average fanboys and stuff, just kind of trying to rack their brain about how does this compute? How does it all fit together? So let's look at some other reasons why people are upset. They feel like Xbox is throwing in the towel when it comes to competing with PlayStation. Now, this is kind of a decent argument that Xbox is throwing in the towel if they decide to just put exclusives on PlayStation, because if there's no reason to buy an Xbox console, people lose interest in buying the console, hardware sales go down, and now, you know, PlayStation gets such a lead that they don't have to compete with Xbox in a real way, which means they could raise the price of PlayStations. They can kind of set the tone and the pace for what, you know, each hardware generation is going to be. Now, again, I think that's a really, really huge assumption. Nothing has been said or rumored about Xbox getting out of the console game, and I'm sure very smart people have been running the numbers about if they would still find it feasible to continue to make Xbox hardware. I can't imagine they've invested the money they have in games as well as in hardware and those production pipelines to just kind of walk away from it entirely. I can't imagine a world where Microsoft stops making Xboxes. And I know what people are thinking, like it happened to Sega. Sega, a much smaller company, right? Microsoft is a $3 trillion company that was confirmed, or they had hit that mark just after laying off 1,900 people, right? Like, there's money here, and I want to talk about the layoffs too, but you know, today let's just focus on this because this video is already terribly long and I'm definitely not going to edit it. People fear that without exclusives, Xbox sales will slow and then the whole thing kind of falls apart. Kind of just what I said, like if there's a loss of interest in Xbox consoles and they don't sell as well, then maybe Microsoft as a parental company or the parental entity will then, you know, give Xbox less resources or give them less leeway to put a lot of money into their hardware, etc., and support just kind of falls. There's a fear that console sales will lead to less support for Microsoft, third-party game makers, fear that lack of competition with PlayStation will allow PlayStation to raise prices unchecked, and of course the other things I mentioned. This one is about the fear of your game library being in jeopardy or the value of it going down without a new Xbox. And again, this one is hinged on the precipice that Microsoft stops making Xboxes and people stop buying Xboxes like altogether. So all these things I'm kind of listing really just have to do with this one here. The biggest fear of this just kind of causing death to the Xbox console, and people just can't wrap their minds around why, if you could get exclusives on a PlayStation, why you would want to buy an Xbox. And again, I'm just going to say timed exclusivity, right? And people are not going to want to wait. You could potentially get sucked into the Xbox ecosystem if you get exposed to a game that you didn't know you loved, and then that becomes your favorite thing. And then it's like, okay, well, I'll buy an Xbox or get a Game Pass subscription so I can have day one access to that instead of having to wait for it. So I can play with all my friends. I can be part of the zeitgeist of the community surrounding that game. People aren't going to want to wait because they might miss out, right? Some games die in 3, 4, 5 months, right? Or multiplayer games especially. You got to kind of get in there when the getting's good. You don't know what's going to happen. And maybe that's not a good argument, because if that happens, then Xbox isn't producing really good exclusives at that point that people are going to want to play for longer than a couple of months or whatever. But single player games are kind of just like that. People do go back to them, but you know, the amount of people that even finish the games is pretty low. Why would you own an Xbox if you could get all the games on one console? Again, I think it's just because people aren't going to want to wait. Like, someone's always going to want to be there first and get in the door right away with like, if there's a big Xbox exclusive, it's just people aren't going to want to wait. There's going to always be a group of people who are going to want to have it now. So yeah, I think it's a big assumption that PlayStation will stand alone if this happens, and that this is an irreversible kind of move by Xbox. Microsoft has tons of money, and they just dumped $70 billion into buying Activision Blizzard. I don't think they're just going to throw in the towel, and I don't think putting a few exclusives on PlayStation is throwing in the towel. And in the event that they did a pipeline where they're putting all of the exclusives onto PlayStation, I think they're going to find the timing or a window that makes a lot of sense, whether it's a year or 6 months or whatever it happens to be, that helps them get a lot more money right away. And I know there's a lot of people who argue that getting into the Xbox ecosystem is more valuable than the sales of games. And I'd argue that's not the case. I mean, that's what Microsoft spent a majority of the FTC lawsuit arguing about, right? Saying we'd be foolish to leave all of this Call of Duty money on the table if we just kept Call of Duty exclusive. And the argument around that was that Call of Duty had such a huge fan base and such a huge user base that they would be just losing millions of dollars to do that. So there would be no motive, right, for them to do that. That's what they had to argue. They argued that in court. And, you know, you could go back and forth on whether or not you believe that's true or not. The analyst that the FTC brought in certainly couldn't prove that it wasn't true. He had a tough time of it. And so, yeah, I think it's an interesting strategy for sure. And it's like Paul Tassi said, there's a lot of questions around it, but like, I don't think this is endgame, guys. So Phil Spencer has admitted to losing the console wars a number of times over the years, and that Xbox's strategy doesn't revolve around selling more boxes. He's already said that a lot in a lot of different interviews. This comes from Protocol. This was in a piece titled "Why Big Tech is Betting Big on Gaming in 2020." This is from Seth Scheisel. And right down here, we can find a quote from Phil Spencer. "One of Microsoft's main selling points for the new Xbox will be integration with its xCloud technology, which is meant to allow you to play the same game across a console, a desktop, PC, and a mobile device." Phil Spencer said, "When you talk about Nintendo and Sony, we have a ton of respect for them, but we see Amazon and Google as the main competitors going forward. That's not to disrespect Nintendo and Sony, but the traditional gaming companies are somewhat out of position. I guess they could try to recreate Azure, but we've invested tens of billions of dollars in the cloud over the years." He goes on, "I don't want to be in a fight over format wars with those guys, while Amazon and Google are focusing on how to get gaming to 7 billion people around the world. Ultimately, that's the goal." This is such an important quote for what's going on right now. It is my feeling, because back in 2020, the writing was on the wall, and what the argument was if you're listening, is Phil Spencer is afraid of Google or Amazon coming in and just buying half of the games industry outright. So Microsoft tried to beat them to the punch by buying up all these studios, because at least if Microsoft buys them, then Google or Amazon can't get them, and then figure out cloud gaming eventually when the technical resources are there, the technical infrastructure improves across the United States and across the world, where people are just going to have better internet. People with disposable income are going to have better internet, where streaming is going to work better. And so that's the bet, right? This is a bet that was made years ago. And this is kind of the strategy that Microsoft set themselves down on. And that's what they argued during the FTC court case in the bid to buy Activision Blizzard, was that they weren't buying just Call of Duty. They were more interested in the cell phone aspect, the Activision Blizzard the king part, Candy Crush and all the mobile infrastructure. And that's why they were buying the company. That was the argument then that they made to the FTC. And that makes a lot more sense if you think about what's happening now, right? So they're trying to beat Amazon and Google to streaming, which I know is laughable right now. And it doesn't seem that hard, right? But again, these companies have so much money that they can just buy their way in. And then, before you know it, half the gaming company's gone. They're trying to be, and Xbox has kind of talked about this before, I think, and Phil Spencer has. In a way, Xbox would like to be the Netflix of gaming, even though those kind of subscription platforms and services have their own issues and problems. As we're kind of even seeing with Game Pass, there's just so much here. There's a lot. This is just very fascinating, very unprecedented, and very interesting. So I understand why people are losing their minds. So here's my own thoughts. Just to recap, I don't think this means the end for Xbox by any means, right? Again, Microsoft, $3 trillion company. They have their foot in the door, third place in a multi-billion dollar industry, right? They're not going to just let that go. They might do something new or creative, but I don't think that Xbox hardware is going away. Something Microsoft could try while still maintaining exclusivity for a number of other titles. I believe that. You could buy the game on PlayStation for $70, or you could pay $15 a month to get this game day one, in addition to a huge game library, right, and other Xbox exclusives day one. For me, the logic still is more towards a subscription service than spending, $70 every time you want an Xbox game and a PlayStation game, because PlayStation's already said they're not interested in doing day one and date with PlayStation Plus. It makes a lot of sense if you can trash the console wars part of your brain. Xbox is saying we aren't going to beat PlayStation at selling Xboxes anytime soon, so let's change the playing field. They are doing that with Game Pass right now, and I think this move is clearly part of that strategy. It could free them up to make a different kind of box, or a more specific box or handheld. Nintendo Switch, obviously very successful. PlayStation and Xbox got to be looking at that. There's a Steam Deck now. Intel's getting into the handheld business. You've got the Asus ROG Ally, the ROG Ally, a Republic of Gamers rise up. And I think if Xbox were to let go of some of the console war nature, or they're not competing in a way where they're trying to make an Xbox that fits everyone, or they're not specifically trying to compete with PlayStation, they can make a more specific box on either end of the scale. I think they can make they can undercut a really expensive PlayStation, right, with a lower tier hardware, or they could go the other way, or they can make a box that's more expensive than PlayStation's and try to say well, we've got the absolute best box. Yeah, it's expensive, but it's the best place to play Xbox games. If they could focus on making a high performance console without worrying about that lower tier, right? They're saying we're going to offload that to streaming and people playing on their phones and PCs and stuff. They want to buy a cheap PC, they can do that. And they build a more expensive console. They're losing money either way on hardware. So I guess I could see the argument that maybe this is Xbox's time to get out of hardware altogether. I don't personally see it. They've got too much already invested. There's got too much on the line. They're already entrenched in such a way that it would be really leaving a lot of money on the table if they were to step out completely. And again, I think people are always going to want to buy consoles because of the convenience, right? Well, some of us don't want to sit at our desk after being at our desk all day, right? We don't want to play games at our desk when we've already just been sitting in the same place all day. Time exclusivity matters. This goes back to what I was saying before, where PlayStation was kind of, and Xbox did this too, but they would go and they would buy exclusivity for a certain amount of time, right? 6 months, a year, until they had the advantage, and then eventually people would buy that game on other consoles when eventually it got there. But all of the excitement for the new release, for the new game, the new hotness was around the aligning that brand with PlayStation, or but in some cases with Xbox when they would buy timed exclusivity, like Xbox did with Call of Duty content for a long time, and then that switched to PlayStation eventually. But my thinking here is just basically that this is now going to happen, you know, in a battle over the subscription services, right? With day one access on Game Pass, and, you know, probably not on PlayStation Plus, because Sony already said they're not interested in doing that. They think it hurts their business. And they've said that. That's a direct quote. So I think the last point I'm going to kind of try and make here is that I think that console growth, or, you know, the game industry growing in general, has kind of hit a little bit of a plateau. It's not growing as fast as it was, and it feels like it's slowing down a lot, especially after kind of the year and a half, 2 years of quarantine with COVID. And so, yeah, now it feels like things are stagnating in a way. And now there's this rush to kind of recoup these different costs, things that were big bets that didn't pay off. And I think it's a big risk to bet on AAA exclusives or games that could potentially move consoles, right? That's generally the way it's done, though. Content is king. People will buy a box based on what games you can play on it, right? And the thing that confuses me about a lot of the kind of outrage and the meltdowns is you will still be able to buy those games on Xbox, whatever the exclusives are, and probably more, right? I don't think Xbox is going to put themselves in a situation where a majority of their library is also available on PlayStation, or a majority of their current library is available on PlayStation. I mean, even Gears of War at this point, I don't know if I'd call it a dead game, but it's certainly a game I don't think many people are playing right now. So bringing that over to PlayStation feels relatively harmless to me. And like the idea that that's offensive or that's watering down the brand of Xbox is, I think that's like a gut reaction that we need to get away from, because being able to play these different games on whatever console you want to is ultimately, I think, better for the consumer. But I can also see how if it contributes to a lack of competition, then that's worse for the consumer. And I kind of talked about this before, but trying to figure out the math for how many Xboxes a game like Starfield is going to sell is not as concrete as like, hey, we have a game that sold this much on Xbox, and now if we release it on PlayStation, we're pretty sure it will at least get this many sales, right? I think that's a lot easier math than trying to figure out what the next hit game is that's going to sell Xbox consoles or get somebody invested in Game Pass. So while Microsoft can focus on Game Pass, they can also sell games on PlayStation. It's kind of really smart, in my opinion. I know it's incredibly scary for a lot of other people. If you can kind of break yourself of thinking like in terms of my team, your team type of mentality, then I think it kind of makes a lot more sense in terms of the amount of money that Xbox could potentially make here. And again, this is blown up in a way that they probably weren't expecting, right? They weren't expecting this information to leak, and the rumors have been swirling around for a while. So it's kind of like a perfect storm where they probably didn't land strategically where they want to, and now the messaging is all out of control. But I think that's a problem that Xbox is pretty good at solving. All right, I think this is a good place to stop. I've been talking for way too long, and obviously it's a big topic, and I could keep going on, but I'm not going to do that to you. Hopefully this has provided some more optimistic perspective about what could happen in the event that Microsoft does go down this path. I don't think it's the end of the world. I don't think Xbox consoles are going anywhere. I mean, even if they have a bad year, I mean, if they survived the Xbox One era, I'm pretty sure they can survive whatever's next, and I'm pretty sure they can course correct. A $3 trillion company with a huge footing in the gaming space, a multi-billion dollar industry. It's too much money on the table to let go. So yeah, I'm willing to go into this, like, I feel like a little more level-headed than a lot of other content creators right now and a lot of other people on the internet. But yeah, let's hash it out in the comments. Let me know your thoughts, and I'll catch you on the next video.